All right, we'll say good morning. Let us begin. We'll begin by thanking our sponsors, our Talmud Torah sponsors, for the month of Cheshvan. To thank you all in Sarah Kalman for dedicating all the Shirim and Drushos this month. Our Daf Yomi sponsors, as a Zechus for Shlema for Dr. Aviva Weisbar Duchama Aviva Bas Sheina Chana, as well as for Rachel Yehudis Bas Tov Gittel. We hope that these special women have a refuah together with Kol Chole Yisrael. Now, both with that, let us begin. Okay, good. So we'll say a lot to do today. Meir Hashem starting the parak today as well. Really incredible sugi. So we left off. Today's daf is Sadik K95. A lot to do. We left off on Sadik Daladam with base 94b and Mikol Makom Kashya. So we'll say, remember again, we left off with the Machlokes Rav and Shmuel with the case in the mission of Bayis Shenifrat Mishtei Ruchosav, a home that's breached on two different sides. So we kind of apologize. We left off a little bit in the middle of the conversation yesterday. So the Gemara says, Mikol Makom Kashya. Nevertheless, we are left with a question. What is the question? So the Gemara says, the question is, Lama, why does P Tikra only work from one direction and not from two directions? So it says the Gemara, Ki de Amri Beirav Mishmei de Rav, Ki gon Shenifratz Bekeren Zavis Vikiruya Ba'alachson. Because let's remember again, the way we explained Rav's understanding over here is that the home in question was breached on the corner. That's what it means, Mishtei Ruchos. And ultimately, again, it had a sloped roof. So the breach on the corner is what makes it from two directions. And remember, we saw an interesting idea that even if you subscribe to the concept of Pi Tikra Yod V'Sosing, that the edge of the roof could kind of come down and form a mechitza that is only with a flat roof, not with a sloped roof. So this is actually quite fascinating. So to over here, the Gemara suggests that the case in question is where the wall was breached a total of four different tfachim of four places. Now, I will say, if you take a look, this is picture. So this is picture 342. So we'll say, if you look in picture 342, you'll notice over here that according to Shmuel, what's unfolding, we'll say, is the wall is breached, if you notice, in four different ways. Which of us means that according to Shmuel, in order to seal off this breach, you would need four different pitikras. That would say it's actually great on picture 342. You can see it's numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4. You would need to apply pitikra in four different locations. So the Gemara says, and I remember again what I was mentioning, is as follows, that according to Shmuel, the Gemara mentioned that according to Shmuel, halacha l'maisa, Pitikra Yod V'Sosing only works if you have one full mechitza. If you have one full mechitza, then halacha l'maisa, you can go ahead and do Pitikra on the other three sides. But if you have no walls, at all, Shmuel holds that you cannot apply Pitikra on four sides. We'll say that's the Achsadra case, as we're going to see for a moment. So therefore, the case according to Shmuel, what does it mean that the home was breached on two sides? It means that it was breached in a corner. So why can't you say Pitikra? Because Shmuel's case is the nature of the breach is that it would require, again, Pitikra on four different parts. Again, you'll refer to picture 342. And Shmuel holds the Shitaso that halach l'maisi, you can't have Pitikra on all four walls. So the Gemara says, Shmuel Omer Karav Alachson Lo Ketani. So Shmuel doesn't hold of Rav's interpretation. Why? Because the Mishnah doesn't make any mention of a sloped roof. But Rav Lo Omer Kishmuel. Rav doesn't hold like Shmuel because Imkain Habile Achsadra. And Rav doesn't hold like Shmuel because according to Shmuel, then the case the way he's setting it up should be a typical case of Achsadra. And again, remember, if it comes to Achsadra, what's our Achsadra? Achsadra is our roofed pergola. V'Rav Lo Tamei Da'amar Achsadra Mutar L'Taltel Bekula. But remember again, Rav holds that in general, an Achsadra case, you are permitted to carry under the Achsadra. Why? The Itmar Achsadra Babika. If you have an Achsadra in a large open area, Rav Amar Mutar L'Taltel Bekula. Rav says you carry throughout the entire Achsadra. Ushmuel Amar In L'Taltel by Ela Ba'arba Amo. Shmuel says you're limited to Dalad Amos. Rav Amar Mutar L'Taltel Bekula. Amina Pitik Yer V'Sosing. So you've seen this before a number of times already. So Rav said this is a fascinating case. You have again a roofed pergola. So Rav says that entire area is considered to be enclosed. Why? Pi tikra yard v'sosing. We view the edge of each side of the roof as if it extends downward. Therefore, you have four walls, totally enclosed area, and you can carry in there. Shmuel says Aim metaltalin ba ela ba'arba amos. Shmuel says you only have dalet amos. Why? Because Shmuel says we don't say pitikra. Now, also we've clarified that point. It's not the pshat that Shmuel doesn't hold of pitikra. Shmuel holds of pitikra. What doesn't he hold of? He doesn't hold that pitikra could be applied to 4 walls. In other words, you can't have, if you have no walls, you can't apply pitikra on 4 sides. If you have 1 wall, you could apply pitikra on the remaining 3 sides. Good. So the Gemara says be'eser kuli amalo pligi. So the Gemara now says, we'll say if the breach in question is 10 amos or less, everyone agrees. Keep pligi. So where does the machlokes come up? Be'eser me'eser. If the breach is more than 10 amos, ve'ikada'amri, others explain, be'eser kuli amalo pligi. And I will say ultimately, remember, let me clarify that. If the breach is less than 10 amos, everyone agrees that, remember, let's both say, what's the status of an opening less than 10 amos? Status of opening less than 10 amos? Doorway. It's a Pesach. It's a Pesach. If it's a Pesach, then what? You don't even need to apply Pitikra. Right? You must remember again, Pitikra is what you apply to remedy a breach. But if you have less than 10 amos of opening, you don't need Pitikra. That's called a Pesach. Where does the machlokes come up? I will say the machlokes comes up in an opening of more than 10 amos. V'ikadamri, others explain, no, ki pligi. I'm sorry, v'ikadamri, b'yeser kule amalo pligi. Everyone agrees that more than 10 amos is not a machlokes. And I was supposed to say that it's not good. Ki pligi, b'yeser, dam ravi gud. I will say, here we go. Top of Tzadik Hay. Korah dalid matir b'chorva. I will say, if you have a korah, if you have a beam that is 4 tefachim wide, it allows for carrying in a ruin. I will say, this is picture 343. So if you notice over here, picture 343, what you have is an open ruin, right? A ruin that is totally open and reached on one side. If you have a korah, if you have a beam that goes across the top of the churva, so I will say that beam allows for carrying. Now, where does it allow for carrying? Underneath the beam. What's the pshat? I will say because underneath the beam we will apply the concept of pitikra yored v'sosem. Pitikra yored v'sosem. Therefore, we'll say the Gemara says as follows. So, Korah dalid matir b'chorba. Rav Nachman amar Avua, Korah dalid matir b'mayim. So, Rav Avua says, no. The only time that the Korah of 4 tefachim of width allows for you to view the area as enclosed is where? When it's over water. Both of this goes back to what we said before, that in general there are kulas when dealing with water, the allowance for drawing of water. But on dry land that wouldn't work. So the Gemara says, money, so I'm sorry, so money. So I'll say, so whose opinion is reflected? Lahach lishna da'amid be'eser lo pligi be'eser v'divrei hakol. So we'll say ultimately again, according to this version that said that according the amrit eser lo pligi be'eser v'divrei hakol lahach lishna da'amid be'eser pligi kirav. So I'll say ultimately again, if you according to this version that you hold that in the case of 10 tefachim or less, everyone agrees. But more than eser, ultimately again is a machlokes. According to this approach, it would be a case of 10 amos or less, and reflective views, Rav's view. Lema Abai v'Rava to the Rav Shmuel. Maybe Abai and Rava have the same machlokes ultimately as Rav and Shmuel. How do we align it? I'll say, here we go. The Itmar, Sichech Agabi Achsadra, Shiesh La Petzimin. We'll see if you put schach. This is a sukkah case now. You put schach on top of an achsadra, on top of a pergola. And I'll say, obviously, this is an unroofed pergola. So you have an unroofed pergola, you put schach on top of it. And what happens? We'll say the schach has petzimin. Petzimin are boards. If you take a look, no, not yet. So it has petzimin. So what's the halacha? Ksheira. Ultimately, we'll say the presence of the petzimin is going to make the sukkah kosher. Ein lo petzimin. What happens if it doesn't have boards? Abai amar ksheira. The Rava amar. I will say actually take a look at the first Rashi and the Daf. Sheish lo petzimin. Amudin kivun b'mechitzo sepachos migimel. So we'll say, here's what we're assuming petzimin means. Petzimin means boards. And how are these boards arranged? They are arranged at less than 3 tefachim from one another. So what happens if you have boards arranged less than 3 tefachim from one another? Love it. And therefore it's a full wall. So the Gemara says, if so, again, so just understand, you have your pergola, obviously without a roof. The pergola has boards, right? It has walls made of boards that are spaced less than 3 tefachim from each other. You put schach on top of that. So as long as there are petzimin, ultimately again it's kosher. If there are no petzimin, if there are no boards, then the sukkah's not kosher, right? I should say differently. If there are not petzimin, Abaye says it's kosher. Rav says it's psula. What's the pshat? Abai Amar Kshera Amar Pi Tikra Yarbasose. So Abai says the sukkah is kosher. Why? Because remember again, the achsadra obviously has boards on top of it also. So we view the edge board on each side of the achsadra as extending downwards and closing off the sukkah. Pi Tikra Yarbasose. The Rava Amar Psula. Rava will say that ultimately again the sukkah is possible. Why? So the Gemara says Lo Amar Pi Tikra Yarbasose. Ultimately again because Rava will also agree. Excuse me. Rava will say that we do not hold of Pi Tikra Yored V'Sosem. So the Gemara says, Lema Abaye Kirav V'Rava Kishmuel. So we'll say, let's say that Abaye holds like Rav, because remember again, Rav was an Abose who was willing to apply Pi Tikra Yored V'Sosem on multiple sides, and Abaye holds, let me say that again. Say that Abaye holds like Rav, so we'll say Abaye who says that an Achsadra Sukkah, even without walls, even without boards on the sides, is still going to be kosher, because we'll say Pi Tikra Yored V'Sosem. Let's say that Abaye holds like Rav, because Rav was also willing to go ahead and apply Pi Tikra Yored V'Sosem on 4 sides. And Rava, who says that the Achsadra Sukkah without Pitsimim, without boards, is going to be possible, he holds like Shmuel. Because also remember again, we saw with Shmuel, as much as Shmuel said that you could hold the Pi Tikra Yored V'Sosem, he held that what? You can't apply it to 4 open sides. To which the Gemara says, Aliba the Shmuel Kole Amalopli. We'll say in accordance with the position of Shmuel, everyone agrees with his shita. Keep ligi aliba the Rav. So we'll say the machlokes is really in shita's Rav. Abaye kirav. So we'll say Abaye clearly holds like Rav, and that's why Abaye will say that even an achsadra sukkah with no walls will still be kosher because we'll apply Pi Tikra Yored V'Sosem on each side. The Rava will say Ad Kalo Ka'amar Rav Hasav Ela Dahani Mechizas Lachsadra. So we'll say, but Rav will say like this. In my case, I was able to say Pi Tikra Yored V'Sosem by achsadra because the achsadra was made for an achsadra and being used as an achsadra. So when the structure is being used in its normative fashion, that's when you can say Pi Tikra Yored V'Sosem on all 4 sides. Aval Hacha Dahani Mechitzas Lav Lo Sukkah Avidi Lo. But perhaps Rav would say that in the case of using the achsadra for a sukkah, we would not apply Pi Tikra Yored V'Sosem on all 4 sides. Why? Because the achsadra was not made to be used for a sukkah. The achsadra was made to be used to be used as an achsadra. So we'll say, so what the Gemara is introducing is something very interesting. That maybe even Rav holds Pi Tikra Yored V'Sosem. And remember, Rav holds the most expansive version of Pi Tikra Yored V'Sosem, because he holds that you could do it on all 4 sides. Perhaps he only applies that in a case where it's what's called normative usage. Normative usage. But if you're using a structure in its non-normative way, then you cannot utilize Pi Tikra on all 4 sides. Therefore, the usage of an achsadra as a sukkah, which again, at least in this case, is not the normal usage of the achsadra, will not allow you to apply Pi Tikra on all 4 sides. Interesting. Rabbi Yossi Omer Mutaris. Let's remember again. Back to the Mishnah now. So remember, we'll say the topic in the Mishnah was as follows. The topic in the Mishnah was a chutzner that was breached to Rosh Harabim, or a home that was breached, or a mavui that had its lechi or its korah removed at the onset. Right, one Shabbos started. So remember again, Rabbi Huda said, as long as you started Shabbos beheter, right, in a permitted state, that permitted state remains with you throughout the duration of Shabbos. Obviously, you have to fix the chutzner, the bayis, the mavui in advance of next Shabbos. Rabbi Yossi came along and he said, look, if it's mutter for this Shabbos, it's mutter for next Shabbos. And if it's not mutter for next Shabbos, then what? It's aser for this Shabbos. So now, both the Gemara said, let's analyze this sheet. Rabbi Yossi lesser or lahatir? Both say, is Rabbi Yossi? I don't understand. Is Rabbi Yossi coming to aser or to be matir on this Shabbos? So both say, remember again, the Mishnah is dealing with cases of structures which were intact at the onset of Shabbos, and then something happened that they were then breached over the course of Shabbos. So it's a simple shaila. Does the original permitted status remain for the duration of Shabbos, or does it change along with the change in mitzias, change in reality? So is Rabbi Yossi coming to say that it's mutter or it's aser? Amar Rav Sheshes la'asar. Rabbi Yossi is coming to say that it is aser. Amar Rabbi Yochanan la'asar. Tanya Mehachar Brisa that supports this understanding. But the Brisa spells this out a little bit more. Rabbi Yossi, Amar Rabbi Yossi, Kashem she'asur la'asad lavo. Just like, I will say, and again, you fill in the blank, the breached chatzar, the breached home, the mavui whose lechi or kora was removed on Shabbos, is going to be asur for a future Shabbos, kach asur in the osa Shabbos, so too it is prohibited for this Shabbos as well. Ikmar. So the Gemara says, halacha Rabbi Yossi, the halacha indeed follows Rabbi Yossi. Shmuel says, halacha Rabbi Huda. Shmuel said, no, it's not true. The halacha follows Rabbi Huda in the Mishnah. So we'll say, now machlokes in the halacha. So you have Rav Chia Bar Yosef saying the halacha follows Rabbi Yossi, who says again, if the structure is diminished, right, the chutzner is breached, the home was breached, the lechir or is taken from the mavui, those areas become usher now on Shabbos. And then you have Shmuel saying the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda that no, once a particular area begins Shabbos in a permitted state, that permitted status remains for the duration of Shabbos, even if the area undergoes some type of change. Umiyamar Shmuel, okay, we'll say first wide line on Tzad Kemud Aleph. Did Shmuel actually say the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda? So now we learned Amar Rabbi Yehuda. So what's to remember again? There's going to be Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yehuda over here. So Rabbi Yehuda says, Bedra Murim, when ultimately, again, when do we follow the halacha like Rabbi Yehuda? Eruvin Tchumen. I'm sorry, let me say that again. I'm Rabbi Yehuda, Bedra Murim. When is this Sora Bosai? Be'eruvin Tchumen, that you need rishus from someone in order to go ahead and make an Eruv. That's by Eruv Tchumen, right? That's by Eruv Tchumen. We saw this again. Aval be'eruvin Chetzeros, Ma'arvin bein ladas bein shol. Also, when it comes to Eruv Chetzeros, you could go ahead and make an Eruv on someone's behalf, even without their permission. Why? Also, remember again, we had that sugya. I can make an Eruv Chetz. I can't make an Eruv Tchumen on your behalf without your permission. Why? Because we'll say, how does Eruv Tchumen work? Whatever you gain in one direction, you lose in a different direction. So if I make an Eruv on your behalf, as much as I'm gaining you 2,000 amas in the east, I'm making you lose out on any movement, mobility towards the west. I can't do that without your permission. Eruv Chatzeros, conversely, is an objective schos. In other words, there's no downside to Eruv Chatzeros. And therefore, Allah Chalamaisa, I can make an Eruv Chatzeros without your permission. Am Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, and I will say, Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, Halacha Rabbi Yehuda. That halacha ultimately follows Rabbi Yehuda. Below, not only that, Ella Komakom Sheshana Rabbi Yehuda be'Eruvin halacha kamos. Well, so not only that, but wherever the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda in Eruvin, we always paskin like him. Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Afilu b'mavui shenito karasa l'chayev. So is that true even in the case of Osai, of a mavui whose lechi or kora was taken? Because you must remember again, what does Rabbi Yehuda hold in the case of a lechi or a kora which was removed? What does he hold? That's our Mishnah. What does Rabbi Yehuda say? If your mavui started Shabbos with the lechi or kora intact, and then what happened? The lechi or the kora was moved. What's the halacha in Rabbi Yehuda? What's the halacha? You can still carry in that mavui. Do we even follow Rabbi Yehuda in that case? So we'll say the case of the lechi or kora removed in the mavui is not a case of Eruvin. That's a case of mechitzos. Right? Once again, going back to the beginning of the Masechta, a lechi or a kora at the entrance of the mavui is not an eruv. That's a mechitza, right? That's a wall, or that's a hecker. That's a reminder of some sort. So we just said that halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda by eruvin, lav dafka by mechitzos. Am Ravanan l'didimi farshne minei Shmuel kanch nifritz ala karmelis kanch nifritz ala shusran. But or conversely, the other possibility is as follows: that when do we follow Rabbi Yehuda? We follow Rabbi Yehuda ultimately again if the chutzah was breached into a karmelis. So if the chutzah was breached into a rabbinic domain, then we'll follow Rabbi Yehuda and we'll say that halacha l'maisa, we view the chutzah as enclosed for the duration of that Shabbos. Since it began Shabbos enclosed, we view it as remaining enclosed, but for next Shabbos you have to go ahead and fix it. But halacha l'maisa, if the chutzah was breached into a Rosh Hashanah, into a biblical domain, then the halacha does not follow Rabbi Yehuda. Then ultimately, again, we view it as breached even on the current Shabbos. We'll say, how do we paskin? So we already saw a little bit of this in that halacha l'maisa. We'll say 2 mishnayos ago. Remember again, we saw that when you have 2 chatzeros and a wall in between them, and they both made their respective eruvin, if the wall comes down on Shabbos, we'll say, what's the halacha? What's the halacha? We view the wall as up for the remainder of Shabbos. That was the machlokes Rav and Shmuel. We saw that halacha yesterday. Right? The halacha l'maisa, even if the wall comes down on Erev Shabbos, for the 2 chatzeros, ultimately, again, we view that wall as still intact. their respective Eruvin are still intact as well. But that's because, remember, again, we saw the Mishnah Brura. The Mishnah Brura says that's because you're dealing with chatzeros, you're dealing with like domains. But the Shulchan Aruch already told us, but if the chatzer breaches into a Carmelis or breaches into a Rish Rabim, under those circumstances, we view the breach now even on that present Shabbos, and we don't say that since the chatzer began Shabbos in a state of being enclosed, that it remains enclosed. But we'll say, what about the case of a mavui whose kora or lechi was taken? Because this is a very important case as well. So we started Shabbos, we'll say it's going back to the beginning of the Masechta. We started Shabbos, I put a lechi or a kora, right, a vertical beam or a horizontal beam, at the entrance of the mavui. That permits carrying in the mavui. But we'll say, just to be clear, even if you have a shitov, right, even if you have a shitov muvos, you still need a lechi or a kora at the entrance of the mavui to allow for carrying in the mavui. So Erev Shabbos, I put it there. Over the course of Shabbos, something happens to it, it's taken away. What's the status of the mavui? So we'll say the Shulchan Aruch paskins in Siman Shin Samechei Sef Zayin. Mavui shenitlu korosa or lechaya b'Shabbos. If you have a mavui and the lechi or kora was taken away, afapi shehotu lemiktzah Shabbos aser misham ve'elech. We'll say even though again the lechi or kora were there at the onset of Shabbos, ultimately again, once it's taken away, halacha lemaisa again, the mavui becomes aser. And I will say ultimately again, the v'lo aminan kan Shabbos hol v'hutra hutra. So we'll say we don't go ahead and say over here by Shabbos hol v'hutra. Since it started Shabbos in a state of permission, it ends Shabbos. Or you could close out the rest of that Shabbos in a state of permission as well. And he refers us back again to what we saw in Siman Shin Samech Sif Beis, which again we don't have to get into right now. So we'll say halacha l'maisa. It appears that indeed the halacha follows Rabbi Yossi in all three cases. Namely, if you have a chatzar, well, two cases for now, well, three. Chatzar that is breached into a Carmelis, chatzar that's breached into a Rishus Harabim, or a mavoi whose lechi or kora was taken away. In all three of these cases, these domains become usher on that Shabbos. The only case so far where we're going to say holel v'hutra hutra, that if you began Shabbos in a permitted state, that permitted state remains is where? Which case? Which case? The two chatzeros with a wall who both made their respective Eruvin. The wall falls down on Shabbos. We view them still as separate and distinct chatzeros for the duration of that particular Shabbos. Beautiful. Says the Mishnah. Habona aliyah agabi shnei batim. Well, so this is an interesting case. You have two homes, and imagine for a moment you go ahead and you build an aliyah. You build an upper story on top of those homes, right? On top of those homes. So we'll say, so just imagine two homes across from each other. You build an upper story on top of those homes. So we'll say this is still going with the pitik or yard besosim case. Right? We'll say ultimately again, this is still the situation where, remember, now you have an area underneath the upper story, underneath the aliyah, in between the two homes. So we'll say, or we'll say you have a bridge, and there's an area underneath the bridge. So what's the halacha? Rabbi Yehuda holds that you're allowed to carry underneath the aliyah, and you're allowed to carry underneath the bridge. We'll say, what's the logic? The logic is pitikir yard v'sosim. We view the edges of the aliyah as extending downwards, the edges of the bridge as extending downwards, and therefore they enclose the area underneath. The chachamim osrim. The chachamim ultimately say that it is aser. Chachamim say that it's aser. Va'od Rabbi Yehuda ma'arvin l'mavai mafulash. So Rabbi Yehuda also says that you can make an eruv for a mavoi that is open on both sides. On both sides. So the Gemara Shabbos saying Rabbi Yehuda's logic is, Rashi points out, that all Rabbi Yehuda really requires in order to enclose an area is two mechitzas. Two mechitzas is enough to create an enclosure. However, Chum say no, that's not an enclosure, right? You need at least mavoi closed on all three sides, and then a lechi or a korah on the fourth side. Amar Rabba, Rabba says, Lo tema hainu tam Rabbi Yehuda mishum dekasavar beis mechitzas daraisa. Both say, now let's go back for just a second. Why, according to Rabba, why is it that Rabbi Yehuda allows for carrying underneath the aliyah or carrying underneath the bridge? So we'll say, you might think it's because Rabbi Yehuda only requires two mechitzas. That's not the reason. It's because Rabbi Yehuda says that the underneath the aliyah or underneath the bridge, you could apply the concept of pitika yor v'sosim. You view the sides of the aliyah or the sides of the bridge as extending downwards and ultimately going ahead and enclosing the entire area. Yes, Rabbi Yehuda. Mishyesh lo shnei batim mishnei tzidei Rosh Hashanah. So we've seen this case many, many times. If you have two homes across the Rosh Hashanah from each other, so imagine you have a busy street, you have Rosh Hashanah, and you have two homes on either side of the street. So what's the halacha? Ose lechi mikan v'lechi mikan, or kor mikan v'kor mikan, v'nosei me'emtza. So we'll say ultimately again, Rabbi Yehuda says you can make a lechi or a korah on either side, and that allows you to carry across. This is incredible. Carry across the Rosh Hashanah from one home to the other. So the Gemara will say. So interestingly enough, what do you see from that case? And I will say, why does Rabbi Yehuda allow that? Because obviously Rabbi Yehuda is saying is two mechitzos are enough to create an enclosure. That your house on one side, your house on the other side gives you two mechitzos. The presence of the lechi or korah then gives you something additional, and you're clearly Rabbi Yehuda holds that two mechitzos are enough. To which the Gemara says, may I he in mehal lekel lamashne. To which the Gemara says, you're right. In other words, from that case, you could see that Rabbi Yehuda holds that two mechitzos are enough. From the case of the aliyah or the bridge, you would not be able to glean that idea. So what the Gemara is saying is like this: in Achinami, the Mishnah here is introducing to us something dramatically amazing. The sheet of Rabbi Yehuda is that indeed two mechitzas are enough to create an enclosure. In fact, Rabbi Yehuda says that explicitly later on in the Mishnah. That's why he holds that a mavui that is open on both sides, you could still go ahead and put a lechi or a korah and carry in that, because he holds two mechitzas is enough. All the Gemara is saying is, you would not be able to glean that shita from the case of the bridge or the aliyah, the upper story. Why? Because in the case of the bridge or the aliyah, you have something else going on over here. What's the something else? Pitika yord v'sosem. Amar Rav Ashi, Masnisi nami diga. Rav Ashi says that our Mishnah also supports this idea. Midiktani va'od, since the Mishnah uses the lashon of va'od. Rabbi writes when it transitions from the case of aliyah and batim, it also says va'od. Rabbi va'od seems to indicate that it's going ahead and adding on something to the previous discussion. Amar Rav Yehuda. So va'od Amar Rav Yehuda. Mavoi ma'arvin b'mavoi hamafulash v'chacham nosrim. Rabbi Yehuda holds that halacha l'maisa you can make an eruv in an open mavoi, a mavoi that's open on both sides, and the Chum say it's aser. I amit bishlama hasam mishum dekasavar pitigya v'sosem. Hainu diktani va'od. Ela I amit mishum dekasavar shtei mechitzos daraisa my va'od. So both say if you understand that the Gemara is coming to introduce a new discussion, that's why it brings in va'od. See, they both say there's two, but if you're saying it's the same conversation, then why do you need the va'od? In other words, stated to go back and analyze the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda is stating two different shitas over here. In the case of the bridge and the case of the aliyah, he holds that you can go ahead and carry underneath the bridge, underneath the aliyah. Why? According to Rabbi Yehuda, why? Pitikra yored v'sosing. We view the edge of the aliyah, edge of the bridge, as extending downwards. Nothing to do with two mechitzas, to do with pitikra. Then va'od, then by the way, the Gemara says, or the Mishnah says, there's another conversation. What's the other conversation? That you could even carry in an open mavoi. Why? Because Rabbi Yehuda holds that two mechitzas ultimately again are enough. So two different ideas being espoused by Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah, pitik yord v'sosem, and ultimately again two mechitzas are enough doraisa. So we'll say obviously again halacha l'maisa. So we know we paskin like the chachamim. Certainly again in the case of the mavoi mefulash. But I will say we hold that again two mechitzas are not enough doraisa. And therefore, in the case of a mavoi mefulash, ultimately again it would be considered to be like an open area. Now, I will say in general, the discussion regarding pitik yord v'sosem is an incredible discussion. We're going to still see some of it to come. We'll see the halacha l'maisa, but I will say at least what you begin to see the yesodistic ideas to take with you about pitik yord v'sosem. The yesodistic ideas to take with you regarding pitik yord v'sosem, ultimately again are that it is a halacha l'moshe misinai. It appears that everyone subscribes to it. It is just a machlokes about the application. So, for example, we've seen Rav holds you could apply pitik or yavisosim on four walls, which Abba says is an incredible chiddush. That's the case of the roofed pergola. You could apply it on all four walls. Shmuel says no. Maximum how many walls? According to Shmuel, 3. Maximum 3. You need to have one actual wall. What we've also seen is that halacha l'maisa pitik or yavisosim Abba say might not apply to every structure. So, for example, we saw it apply to a pergola, but it might not apply to a sukkah. We also saw that the nature of the roof could also impact the application of pitik. So, say, for example, we saw this idea, at least according to Rav, that a sloped roof, you cannot go ahead and apply P-Tigger. It only works with a flat roof. So just keep all of these things in mind. We will do a halacha lamaisa piece on P-Tigger before the end of the Masechta. Hadron halach, kol gan. So we'll say Mazel Tov. We now enter the last parak of Meseches Eruvin. Pretty incredible. Says the Mishnah. Hamotzi tefillin. We'll say, listen to such a fascinating case. Shabbos, you find a pair of tefillin on the ground. So we'll say, how do you go? And I will say, we're talking about a case over here where, so the question is, I'm either outside of the tchum, we'll see, or again, really, what we're bringing up over here is an issue of carrying. There's no permissible way for me to carry these tefillin. So Hamotzi tefillin, if I find tefillin, so what do? Machnisin zug zug. So we'll say the way you go ahead and bring them into your home or into the city is you go ahead and you put them on. You wear them in one pair. Well, you wear them in zug zug. Rashi says echad rosh ve'echad bezra v'hanu zug kederach shaloshan b'chol b'chozer. So what you go ahead and you do, you bring them in. You wear them in. This is the idea. We're gonna clarify this case more, so I don't want to get too into it now. You find tefillin. You need to go and transport them to a place of safety. You put them on and you wear them in. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Gamliel Omer, Shnayim. So Rabbi Gamliel says you can wear actually up to 2 pairs of tefillin at a time. Again, we'll define exactly what this means. So the Gemara says, so we'll say ultimately, again, when is this said? B'yeshanos. We'll say now, literally it means old tefillin. Aval b'chadoshos pater. But halacha l'maaseh, if it's new tefillin, you can't go ahead and move them. Now, what's the pshat of it? This is really quite fascinating. Look at Rashi, b'yeshanos. Shenikra kesha asik kimin shakai. Devadai tefillin. Now, listen to this. Apparently, in the times of the Gemara, they used to make, they had kumiyos. Kumiyos are amulets. There used to be some amulets which were made that looked like tefillin. So I will say, there is no heter to go ahead and move tefillin, to move amulets on Shabbos, if there's no Eruv or anything else. But you're allowed to move tefillin, as we'll discuss. So I will say, it's interesting, how do you know what's an amulet, what's tefillin, if they look the same? So the one distinction was that amulets by the Shalrosh and by the Shalyad didn't have the specialized knots. So I'll say, let's say you come across a pair of what looks like tefillin, but let's say where the knots were, it's untied. So we'll say you could tell if there was a knot. How can you tell if there was a knot? Because we'll say after enough time of the Ritzua being tied, not even after so long, the leather bends. So if you look at the straps and you see, this was once knotted, then you know that those are tefillin, and that's where there's a heter to go ahead and wear it in. But if we're looking at the straps look new in that they were never formed into a knot. That's a good indication that it's an amulet, it's a kamiyah, and for that you just leave it there. You have no right to go ahead and transport it on Shabbos. That's what it means. But ultimately, again, where the strap itself was not manipulated anyways, therefore was never put into the form of a knot, you can't move that on Shabbos, and halacha l'maaseh, you just leave it alone. But san tzivasim o krichos. So we'll say what happens in the following case. Let's say you found many pairs of tefillin tied together, or many pairs of tefillin piled together. So we'll say, what do you do in that case? Machshich alehen umeviin. So we'll say ultimately, again, in that case, stay with the tefillin until nighttime, and then you'll bring them back in after nighttime. So we'll say, if you look at Rashi is machshich alehen, that's Rashi on the daf. Achetech you wait with the tefillin until it gets dark. V'yishmerim, and watch over them. The Gemara is going to ask, I don't understand, why can't I just employ the same strategy that the Mishnah started with? If I find a lot of pairs of tefillin, I'll say, how do I transport them? Wear them. Just wear them one at a time. Or according to Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Gamliel, I can wear them 2 at a time and just keep going back and forth. Okay, so we'll discuss why that is. Amud Beis. Obe sakana. I will say, what if it's a time of sakana? Time of Amud Beis. Meaning sakana, meaning that halacha l'maisa, I can't wait out there with the tefillin. Whatever the sakana is, I will say. I'm scared of criminals, and therefore I can't just stay out here. What do? Mechasen v'holichlo. I cover the tefillin so that they shouldn't be exposed, and then I go home. I go on my way. Shimon says, how else can you move the tefillin? No stim lechaveru lechaveru ad shemagia lechatzrach yitzona. Both remember again, if you have a situation where carrying is prohibited, even when carrying is prohibited, for example, no eruv, you're always allowed to carry. Technically, there's no isur unless you carry dalaramas. So comes like Rabbi Shimon says, I have a good eitzah for you. Get a bunch of your chaverim. I will say you don't even need so many chaverim, which is all you need to do is hand it from one person to the other. and as long as each person carries it less than Dalet Amis, you can get the tefillin back into the home. So we'll say, so again, remember, I just want to point out, you don't need an assembly line of people, right? It could be the same people. I give it to Ruvain, right? And then I walk by and Ruvain gives it to me. Then I give it to Ruvain. So you can do it with a limited number of people, each of us walking less than Dalet Amis, until we get the tefillin back to habitation. So let's listen to this case. It's very interesting. Let's say a man's wife gave birth in the field, and now we have to get the baby back into the home. Back into the home. So what do? Same idea. You can hand the baby off person to person, right? Everybody carrying the baby less than Dalet Amis until you get the baby back into the house. Even if you employ 100 people in this endeavor. Rabbi Huda says, by the way, it's not just tefillin. No sin adam chavis lechavera v'chavera lechavera afilu chos letchum. So Rabbi Huda says, let's say you have a great bottle of wine, and mamish again it's outside of the tchum, but I need it. It's not a want, it's not a luxury, it's a necessity. So I'll say, what can I do? Rabbi Huda says you can even get a bunch of your chaverim, everybody carrying it less than Dalet Amis, and bring it back into the house. Afilu chos letchum, says the Gemara. Amru lo tehalich zeh yosem ragli bala. So I said, no, 1 second. If you're dealing with utensils outside of the tchum rabosai, so that's already something a little bit different. Because again, remember, and we'll discuss this in greater depth as well, a utensil is often governed by the tchum of its owner. So whatever the owner's tchum is, that's the tchum of the utensil. So the fact that you can go ahead and take care of the issue of carrying does not necessarily obviate the concern regarding the tchum. So we'll say, good. Now let's analyze tefillin. So we'll say, so the Gemara says, zug echad in tefelo. So we'll say, so remember again, we have, interestingly enough, we had a machlok, well, it seems to be a machlokes here, between Tanakam and Rabbi Gamliel. Tanakam holds that if you find tefillin, you could wear the tefillin in. I will say, now remember, I just want to point out, we're not exactly sure, in general, one of the issues we have is what is the status of tefillin on Shabbos? What is the status of tefillin? Right? Is Shabbos a time for tefillin, not a time for tefillin? So again, we're going to discuss all of these related issues. But Lamaisi, here's what I know. I don't have an Eruv, and therefore I can't carry. So because I can't carry, I can't just pick up the tefillin and bring them in. That I know. So how do I deal with it? So Tanakam, the Chum said, put it on. You could put on one pair at a time, wear it in. It's a malbush. It's considered like a garment. You could wear it in. Rabbi Gamliel says you could wear it in 2 pairs at a time. Says the Gemara, Zug echad in tefelo. So the Tanakama says you could wear it in 1 pair at a time, but not anymore. Lema Tanan Stama Delok Rabbi Meir. So I'll say, must see that this Stam Mishnah, right? The Tanakama, this Mishnah must not be Rabbi Meir. Why not? Di Rabbi Meir, HaOmer, Lobish Komashi Yachal Elbosh, Va'otet Komashi Yachalatov. Because once Rabbi Meir holds, and also we're going to see this in just a moment, that in the case of where a fire breaks out in your home on Shabbos, fire breaks out in a person's home on Shabbos, Rabbi Meir holds, and you want to save your clothing. Rabbi Meir holds, will say, how can you save your clothing? Put on as much as you want. Right? Put on 5 suits, put on 10 coats, put on as much as you can to get everything out that you can. So obviously Rabbi Meir is of the so therefore again our Mishnah, which only allows you to put on 1 pair of tefillin, obviously doesn't reflect the view of Rabbi Meir. Because according to Rabbi Meir, we'll say, what should you be able to do? What should you be able to do? Put on as many pairs of tefillin as you want to. This time, also, what's the sheet of Rabbi Meir? Here we go, this time. Well, the Sham motzi kol klei tashmisho, v'lovish komashi yachal lobosh, v'otet komashi yachal latov. Because Rabbi Meir holds it halacha l'maaseh. If the fire breaks out in the home, I could put on as much as I want and wear it out. So we'll say, so obviously our Mishnah does not reflect the view of Rabbi Meir, to which the Gemara says, he stama, mimai Rabbi Meir. So we'll say, by the way, how do you know that the Stam Mishnah by the fire, that allows you to wear as much clothing out as you want, how do you know that that reflects the view of Rabbi Meir? Diktani Allah, lovesh umotzi uposhet, v'lovesh umotzi uposhet, afilu kol hayom kulo div Rabbi Meir. We'll say, okay, pretty explicit. Because Rabbi Meir holds, you could put on as much as you want, go out, take it off, go back in, put on, come back out, take off, keep going on and on. So we'll say, Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that as long as you're wearing it, you can put on as much as you want in order to transport the clothing. So therefore, again, if Rabbi Meir was the author of our Mishnah, I would have said that you could put on as many pairs of tefillin as you could fit and wear them out. Yet the Tanakama holds that you can only put on 1 pair of tefillin. So Amar Rava, Afil Tirei Meir. So Rava says, no. The Mishnah can affect you, Rabbi Meir. Why? Hasam Derech malbusho kichol shavi rabbanon. So we'll say, why does Rabbi Meir allow you to wear out many layers of clothing? Because we'll say, even during the week, it is common for people to layer. It's common for people to layer their clothing. So because it's common to layer, the act of putting on many garments is still considered to be a normative wearage. Is wearage a word? Probably not, right? Because it seems to be a normal wearing of garments. That's derech malbusho. So to Rabbi Meir would hold, the Gemara says, Hacha derech malbusho kechol shavyei. So we'll say, ultimately again, by tefillin, we'll say, also you could wear it, but you have to wear it the way you wear it during the week. How do you wear your tefillin during the week? We'll say, one pair per customer. Except we'll see when that's not true, right? One pair per customer. So therefore, we'll say the Mishnah could even reflect it to Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Meir doesn't just allow you to pile on clothing stam. He allows you to pile on clothing because that's called derech malbusho. People often layer. So therefore, Shabbos, when same clothing, you could layer. But by tefillin, where a person only wears one pair, even Rabbi Meir would agree that when going and transporting the tefillin, you can only wear them one pair at a time. So the Gemara says, Hasam debechol. Here the Gemara says explicitly. Debechol kama debai lavish. So we'll say, when it comes during the week, people often wear many layers of clothing. So too then, when going in and saving your clothing on Shabbos, you could wear many layers. Hacha debechol nami zug echad in tfei lo lein hatzala nami zug echad in tfei lo. So we'll say, when it comes to tefillin, just like tefillin, you normally only wear one pair. Therefore, even according to Rabbi Meir, on Shabbos, you would only wear one pair. Good. I will say that closes out the sheet. So therefore, again, it's possible that the unnamed Tanakama is Rabbi Meir, and the same Rabbi Meir will allow you to go and wear multiple layers of clothing when saving from a fire. Will still only allow you to wear one pair of tefillin back and forth, because halacha l'maisa it's always governed by derech malbusho. You can something is only called a malbush if you wear it in the normal fashion on Shabbos. Rabbi Gamliel omer shnayim. So also Rabbi Gamliel holds you can even wear two pairs of tefillin at a time on Shabbos. So my kasaver. So we'll say, what does Rabbi Gamliel hold? Here we go. We'll say this gets to the core of the issue. Ikasaver Shabbos zman tefillinu. So we'll say, now we drill down to the yisod, this the issue. We'll say, is Shabbos a time of tefillin? Or is there a mitzvah